Enrico, thanks for joining me on SKILLSOOP Unfiltered. How was your flight?
Easy flight today.
Easy flight today.
In and out of the airport.
I wanted to
on
get
the train.
you in for a chat. Obviously, we've known each other for a very long time. But I guess like everything, before we get into, I think, the real theme of today of why transformations fail, let's just hear a bit about your journey to where you got today, if you don't mind, just very high level.
How long have we got? Two careers, corporate career and consulting career. Corporate career, different roles, process engineer, business manager, corporate strategy manager.
Really? So not procurement originally?
No. I got into procurement actually through corporate strategy,
right?
Where we were driving a lot of business improvement out in the divisions, and procurement was always one of the big levers, and used a lot of advisors at the time, and really got to know the topic quite deeply. And
what was your view of procurement before you went into it? Did you have a view, or was it just?
I always saw it as a strong lever. I didn't understand it deeply. It was a very superficial understanding.
Yeah.
But worked with a real legend of a CPO, a guy by the name of Neil Hawker. And Neil was like someone who understood talent, someone who understood, this is back in the 90s, partnerships where they were relevant, but also the importance of competition, and those elements is really what he used to manage.
And you were in heavy industry?
Heavy industry.
Right.
Yeah, chemicals.
Right.
Started with a company which was called ICI, which now broken up, and the Australian offshoots of that are, Orica,
right,
Incitec Pivot,
yeah,
Dulux, Ixom, all spun out of that business.
Okay. And then transitioning into consulting. So my understanding, which could be wrong, is you were in Portland in the Gavin Solsky, David Gardner days.
Yep.
And Olaf as well, I think.
And Olaf was there. Yeah. The three of them were there, and I joined in the Melbourne office. It was a baptism of fire.
Really?
Very, very different to like when you're working with consultants, as opposed to when you are a consultant. That was an interesting transition. My first project, I was working, because I transitioned really late, right? Late, in my late 30s.
That is rare, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's not often.
So you would have gone in as maybe a senior manager, even associate director level?
I did. I did go in as a manager, but I think to Gavin's credit, worked as a associate for my first 12 months under the tutelage of the likes of a young man called Adam Bock, who was a manager at the time.
Yeah,
10 years my junior, who taught me how to consult, basically. Right. But again, Gavin, Dave, being ex-Bain, ex-Kearney, brought those deep disciplines, those structured disciplines, problem solving, good communication, into the business, right, from day one.
For anybody in industry that wants to transition into consulting, what do you think is the three biggest misalignments they might not understand coming from an industry role into a consulting role? Is there any big glaring gaps? You mentioned it was a baptism by fire.
Yeah, it wasn't like I didn't know how to do the analyses. It wasn't like I didn't know how to prepare a slide. But there's a difference between like listening. Clients talk symptomatically. The art of consulting is to actually understand the problem, and then to not treat every problem as a process, right? And I think that's where a lot of procurement consultants miss a lot of value for their clients, where it's, I'll run the cookie cutter, it's an RFP, we'll go to market. That's true. It's often an important step, but how you go to market, what you go to market with, how you create the market, is really where a lot of the value comes from and where a lot of the difference is. But to your question, in terms of misconceptions, you are there to do the work, right? That's what you're paid to do, and you are there to deliver the results. And that's what you build your reputation on, and what you get rewarded for. And that's what the client expects. And I think a lot of consultants come in and they think that, or people coming into consulting, right, don't understand, particularly if you're coming in at that level, what is the role of the analyst? What's the role of the associate? What's the role of the manager, right? What is the nature of the business? Why is intellectual capital important, right? How does that allow you to build a business, be more accretive for your clients, and just the importance and the focus on training and education, right? Lifting the quality and always lifting the bar of your teams and your people. I think it's one of the privileges of working in consulting, actually, where you're working with a segment of industry that is highly driven, pretty smart, right? And sort of are there to deliver the project, deliver the outcome for their clients, and that's a real privilege. And I think if you're going to be successful, you want to work in that sort of environment in consulting.
I've always advised candidates that a year in consulting is at least worth 3 years in industry. Is that fair?
I think they're different, right?
Okay.
They offer different things. I definitely think the pace, there is a truism to that.
I
Richard.
feel like in terms of the learning from the people around you and the constant change and the project environment would give you a lot more.
It's the fact that you may, in a year, work on 3 different clients on 3 different problems, and just the learning you get from that, right? It's call it accelerated learning.
It seems to be an easier transition these days. It feels to me that the consulting firms, now I'm not going to talk tier 1 here or tier 2, and just for my logic, I see KPMG and that as a tier 3 consultant. I think they're much down the spectrum. I see Kearney as probably upper grade tier 2, and I see McKinsey, Bain as tier 1. But and just tiering them in brand power. I think
it depends. We all have our strengths.
Yeah.
Right. I think if you talk about operations, then Kearney's definitely tier 1.
Right.
Right. Which is where I am today and have been for the last 16 years. And I'm sure if you wanted specific financial advice, the KPMG would be a tier 1, right?
And I guess I'm talking more procurement supply chain lens.
And if you look at McKinsey and the MBBs, right, I think there's a generalisation that they are tier 1 in everything. But I don't think that's necessarily true. It varies by geography.
Right.
It varies by industry that they serve. It varies by the topic and the offer that they're bringing to the client.
Feels the transition, though, at the lower level tiers, or should I say then, a lot of the, there's obviously a lot of consultancy firms now in the market.
That's true.
But a lot more people are swapping from industry to consulting than ever before. I remember when I started back in 2002, 2003, it was very rare to get someone to, it was very hard unless they were an analyst or very, very junior in their career. That transition from industry to consulting seemed to be very, very difficult to make happen. It seems to be a lot more common now.
There is, but there's, I think you'd appreciate there's different sorts of consultancies, right? I think you look at, I think it's XTM in the supply chain space, and that's a team of supply chain professionals who bring their experience to the table. I think if you wanted a strategy and a strong business case that the board might want to engage in, then you might go with a Kearney, right? But yeah, look, the competitive dynamics are changing. Even that portfolio of consultants, the industry-based consultants, have recruited professional consultants, right? They've brought the methodologies in. They're starting to codify their IC, right? So again, why do clients use consultants? And I think this is true of irrespective of who you are. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the fact that you know me and you know that I've delivered results for you in the past, and you trust me and I trust you, right? And there's very deep relationships in the business, and they matter, right? Like when someone rings me, they're not ringing Kearney, they're ringing me. When a CFO or a CEO might ring McKinsey, they're not ringing McKinsey reception, right? They're ringing the McKinsey partner, right?
It's typical people business. The relationships.
It's a real people business, right?
So it's very similar to recruitment to that.
Yeah, I would say there's a strong analogy between, right?
It's a difficult line just to essentially follow, isn't it? Because the consulting industry sometimes gets tarred with a bad brush because, to do these pieces of work, now it could be simple workforce augmentation at a lower level, but it can go right to transformation end to end. But there's horror. I mean, I've read the book When McKinsey Comes to Town, and you can go, you go down. Every brand can get dragged through the mud for something. So can recruitment firms, by the way. So it's all the same.
Exactly right.
It is a difficult line to walk, isn't it? I imagine, because and what the question I had is, how often is, just before we get onto the main topic, because it sort of leads us in, how often is it? Where's the balance of fault? Or does it, I'm sure it varies, but is it a lack of a business's understanding of what they're trying to achieve and their commitment to change and maybe discipline? Or is it the consulting firm not understanding sometimes the problem or the complexity, or, where's the balance of
all of the above?
Yeah. So it really is a moving.
Look, no client is, they might be in the same industry. They'll have a different culture, different leadership, different maturity, and different structure, different strategy. Those need to be accounted for, right? And I think that's where transformations need to be designed for the client, right? And that's often like, well, because it worked over here doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work over there. And I think that's a mistake that certainly younger consultants, younger partners might actually make.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm not into, I do this podcast. I'm not there to plug any particular business or any particular product or promote any particular individual. The reason I do this is because I like having conversations. I like hopefully add value to the market. But I must admit, I did read the book that you kindly posted to me, A Lighthouse in a Global Storm, and I was really, really impressed. I think it's really well written. It's really simple in terms of the topics it articulates.
Yep.
And everything just smacked me in the face that I agree with 100% of everything that's written. Like it seems to be calling out the real issues with this country and the corporate complex and the political complex.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it. And I didn't think I would. I was going to read it as a chore before we had this podcast. I thought I better read it. Enrico, he's probably going to quiz me. But no, it's one of the best business books I've read.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. And I did pick it up on the weekend.
Yeah.
By the fire.
Yeah.
I thought, here we go. Fucking homework. And I just didn't put it down. I literally went through 2/3 of the book before I put it down, which was easy because it's not massive. So
it's not, and it's structured as an easy read.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who does pick it up will resonate strongly with the thematics. It is Adam Dixon, who was our former managing partner, was the principal author. His undergrad was in English literature. That comes through in the book in terms of how easy it is to read. But a good thinker, and then the partners have equally contributed their perspectives, their content, as have many of the consultants in the business.
But it's not full of crap jargon. It's just nice, simple.
Yep, it's written in English.
Yeah,
but
and I like
consulting
that.
Jargon. Right.
For a simple Welshman, it was easy for my brain to get around. So I did enjoy it. Which leads us on then to, the main core of this chat, why transformations fail. And you've been in the corporate world way longer than me. It's nice to meet someone older than me these days. But in the years I've been doing it, obviously, we recruited for a lot of transformations, or at least the procurement or supply chain element of those broader. And, I believe most fail. From what I see, most don't actually seem to deliver what was on the tin. And I'm always asking people, why is change in a business so hard? When it's a mix of process, technology, people, and of course, strategy and planning.
Yeah.
But it seems that it's a very, very challenging thing to do. So first question I would have is because a lot of businesses ring up and say, we're going through a transformation, but I don't think they are. I think some are actually just, they're using corporate jargon to describe a simple implementation of P2P or e-procurement, or they're doing a business plan.
Yeah.
They're not doing a transformation. They're not even doing a strategy. They're doing a business plan, and they're executing something that doesn't involve the customer. They have full control over what they're executing, whether it be moving a manufacturing plant from one country to another or implementing a new thing. But it only impacts really the internal elements of that business. And to me, that can't be a strategy. It's a business plan. So in your view, with your expertise, what is a transformation? How would you articulate it?
Oh, good question. I think it is. I think what you're saying is that it's an overused word, right? Or it's a word used too liberally to describe like an improvement program within an organization. I think if you wanted to get to the heart of what a true transformation is, it's something that delivers a step change to the business, right? So is it a step change in productivity? Is it a step change in customer performance? Is it a step change in return on invested capital? Or is it all the above? And it can be all of those things, right? It's not something that drives incremental improvement, right? Which is more around the BAU.
Okay. In the book, it seems to lean heavily that a transformation should be aimed at customer experience and improvement fundamentally.
Yeah. With the customer in mind.
With the customer
always.
In mind. Always.
B2C or B2B, right?
Yeah. And that then would lead to probably a business strategy should have the customer in mind as well. It should be a customer-centric.
Yeah.
I'm using that jargon myself now, but it should be a customer approach with a driver to increasing market share or profit.
Yeah.
And both, ideally.
Yeah.
Do you think a lot of businesses fail to understand what they actually do? They don't know how to really understand what their business's core function is, which then can completely hinder the strategic approach they're trying to take.
No, I find, most executives around the executive table understand their business.
They get it. They understand
they get
completely
it, right?
what they do.
I think it'd be a fairly arrogant view to say that they don't.
Yeah.
Right. And indeed, I think many consulting firms, and in fact, I try to teach the young analysts like that we should respect the opinion of the ELT, right?
Yeah.
Like many of these people are 20, 30 years in their industry or have been in industry for that length of time and indeed sort of have a depth of knowledge, right? Which can equal that of the partner, if not sometimes be deeper. The consulting firm or the consulting partner has the privilege of working across different industries, seeing different approaches, different what's possible, right? And so that's the interesting discussion, right? Where you bring an outside-in view, right? And it's also, I think, the role of the advisor is to actually sometimes just hold up the mirror or provide a mirror, right? Where the client is, or even just have the client step outside of the forest and see the forest, right? Because I think we've all been, I think one of the things that I've found helpful in my career has been that I've worked both sides, right?
Yeah.
So strong empathy for where the client's at, right? Strong appreciation for the fact that they're running a BAU business, right? And you've got to get the product, you've got to get the service to that customer, right? And at the same time, it's the old adage, particularly on transformations and why they are so challenging, is to use a well-trodden analogy, like you're flying the plane whilst you're rebuilding the plane.
Yeah.
Right?
You can't disrupt business flow.
Right. You can't stop the business, right? Sure, people would like to do that, right?
So let's go through then some of the key issues that I think were touched on in the book. The one is the moral dilemma of CEOs right now. I think one of the stats was CEO sackings have gone down from 24% to 19%, but they used to get sacked for fiscal issues. Now they're getting almost sacked through cancel culture or through other areas as well. I mean, it flows down into the
without quoting the numbers, but to give you sort of indicative, like if 15 years ago CEOs were getting sacked 80% of the time for business performance, that's dropped to 20%.
Yeah.
So the reasons that they're getting sacked have changed.
Yeah.
And a lot of those, putting cancel culture to the side for a moment, but a lot of those have been in and around behaviours and bad behaviours. And look, I think the book argues that some of that's justified, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think we need to move forward as a society, as business leaders, right? You're only as good as the standard that you walk past, as we say. But the book also argues that presents a significant challenge for CEOs today when they're needing to balance just the breadth of competing interests. And I think that's the complexity of the job today.
Yeah, it seems that stakeholder capitalism is the dominant force in the last 10 years that's overriding what used to be around shareholder return, is now getting I'd say confused, but probably more spread across multiple agendas. which means it's very hard then to toe the line on a strategic direction.
Yep.
Is that fair as an analysis of?
But it's only responding to sort of the broader societal expectations, right? So, if you're a products company and, there's a generation coming through that doesn't want to see, slave labor, right? Or some form of enforced slave labor making their products, right? Well, you should respond to that, right? So it's good business to be a good social citizen, right? But it doesn't make it any easier, is what the book is really calling out, right? And we shouldn't forget in all of this, we shouldn't forget that ultimately, like, the business is there to do two things, right? Or an executive and a board are there to do two things: ensure the longevity of the business, right? And so those things are important for the longevity, right, of the business, but equally ensure the performance of the business, right? Ensure that the business continues to grow, because with growth, you get better talent, you get better performance, right? You become more sustainable, right?
So, in your opinion, is it achievable to, I guess, operate a corporation where stakeholder capitalism is key and still produce year-on-year growth, dividends, and increased market share? Because I know it's more challenging, but do you believe it is possible? And I guess that
I do. I mean, I think the thing about transformations is that they need to be in the context of today, but also the context of tomorrow, right? No point transforming a business for today if it isn't going to meet the needs of tomorrow. And I think good transformations, right, provide the business with the capabilities, provide the business with the strategy that will ensure that it's a sustainable business tomorrow, right? And yes, you can have a sugar hit, right? But, if the sugar hit does so much damage to a business, right, that it doesn't have the capacity beyond 2 or 3 years to sustain its performance, right? In fact, performance degrades, then I don't think that's the definition of a successful transformation.
And for the business to have that value, it seems, from my take anyway, that CEOs need to stand their ground more against government policy or things they see as unreasonable, rather than be an internal broker to the government.
I think that's a really good point, right? It's sort of where you have governments
with idealisms,
with an ideology, right, and an ideologically driven agenda, right, which isn't balanced against the affordability of that agenda, let alone the unrealistic timing, right, that is placed on the execution, right, then I think, and our energy sector is a great example of that, right? Complete example of that.
It's badly handled.
And, both sides of politics have been just as bad as each other over the last 20 years.
They've got the same master, don't they?
Well, 25 years, right?
They report to the same person.
Yeah. So...
yeah. I think, and it's only probably the C-suite in the private sector that have some leverage and power to hold the government to account in, lobbying against some things. I think that if we're to sort of change the tide of where I think we're heading, which is socialism, I mean, I think that a lot of, because I want to lead on to productivity, but I think, a lot of, can't have a $250 billion payroll on public sector, and that's not including contractors on top of that and things like that, and expect the country to have a productive workforce. And I don't even measure GDP. I mean, I can get someone to dig a hole for $50 and then fill it in for $50. There's $100 to GDP, and it's actually achieved nothing. So I'm not even looking at GDP with that. But I do think productivity, it's like gone down 50%, according to, I think, this book. It's currently at 0.45%, something like that, from averaging 1.1 over the last 15, 20 years. I do think that's a serious issue, and I think we do need to get a lot of the private sector back, which I think will only happen with less regulation, cheaper energy. I don't see us doing it. Energy is a complete link to GDP growth. If we are measuring it on GDP, there's a huge correlation between energy, cheapness of energy. So I like that comment in the book that was on about like the C-suite need to have more confidence in standing their ground and finding that balance between what used to be old shareholder value and business performance. To me, it's like my daughter's netball team. The politics overrides the team. I mean, you go to a netball game and they're confused about playing to win, but giving everyone a go on the court. You can't do both. I think sometimes you've got to either pick your poison. Is it for the kids to have a good time and play a bit of netball on a Saturday morning, or are you trying to win the league? And you can't be confused on that. So I feel that it did interest me. So then productivity.
Yeah.
Which is really bad, obviously. What's your view on that topic, and how, in your opinion, could we increase it?
The $64 million question. Look, I think social trends swing, right? And I think that's a good thing, right? You need a bit of left, you need a bit of right.
Yeah.
I think Australia does a pretty good job at looking after the less well-heeled, right, relative to some other countries, and I respect that, right?
Yeah. Which is what you want from a modern developed society.
Which is what I, would like to see, right? Yeah. But it is worrisome when GDP growth is running at less than inflation, right? So, it's sort of maybe at 2%, right? Going to drop to maybe 1%, right? And inflation is running at 3, 4,
11, probably 15, real terms.
Well, the challenge that we all have, right? Governments, industry, the communities, is that, like, under that scenario, we're all getting poorer, right? And so the things that we've come to enjoy, we can no longer afford, right? So, and the answer to that is productivity. And I do think it's not a difficult thing, in the sense that Paul Keating, the Hawke era, right? They, governments need to know how to balance and manage the expectations of workers, employers, right? There's no point putting people at odds, right? And there's certainly no room for corruption, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I think as a country has been, I think, a pillar of Australia is the lack of corruption, right? You start to go down, and there's plenty of examples globally of where corrupt governments and or corrupt factions sort of really bring society undone, right? You look at Albania, right? What it could have been, what it became under a corrupt government, which is a liberal corrupt government, right? So that's a really extreme example, right, of where we don't want to go. How do you improve productivity? Well, you create an environment that fosters investment, right?
Improved R&D, yeah.
Improved R&D, but it's sort of like don't tax the businesses and the capital growth, right? That seems like a crazy thing to do, right? When you want people investing, right? You want new businesses investing, right? And if I get taxed the same rate as a worker as I do growing a business, like for a lot of people, why would I take the risk, right? Why would I take the risk? So I think getting that environment right,
well, I mean,
is really important.
Anthony Albanese now owns 47% of SKILLSOOP, doesn't he? I mean, with his new tax laws, I mean, it does make me think, well, why would I do this? I mean, I do it because I'm enjoying what I'm doing, but
I know, but there's got to be a risk reward equation in there. And so without investment, there is no productivity growth.
It's interesting as well that Australia's up on the upper bandwidth of yield return to shareholders, and with CEOs having ever shorter stints in their roles.
But we're a dividend.
Yeah.
We've always been a dividend economy. But
it does probably mean that less capital is allocated to R&D because you're ultimately...
Yeah. We lag there.
We're on a quarterly cycle and everything is really relative to the next quarterly announcements.
But I do think you also touched on the cost of energy, right? Yeah. If you look at what the US has done, right, in reducing its cost of energy, right, in being more pragmatic around energy transition, right? They're not saying they won't do it, right? They're just saying we need to be pragmatic and weigh up, right, the cost of transition and the impact that has on the broader community at a point in time, right? And so without that, industry can't compete. Right? You just can't compete, right? Or you just look in the fertilizer industry, right? It's, fertilizer plant was shut in Brisbane.
Yeah.
Right?
It's madness.
There's a view as, can the fertilizer plant in central Queensland continue to run, right? Would explosives manufacturers continue to make investments in new ammonium nitrate facilities, which is core to our mining industry? And I think if you look at those sectors, just outside in, the economics of gas just don't work, right? And it's just, again, ideological driven agendas, but also bad policy of past governments.
Which is going to impact foreign direct investment, isn't it?
Well, of course it is.
Because it's just, capital's not going to come here.
But even domestic investment, you look at the size of our super funds, right?
Which Albo's now taking over, isn't he?
Well, I don't know.
He thinks it's his.
But I do think, the fact that they're investing so much overseas says that as an investor, right? And I'm glad that sort of, that our super funds are looking out overseas, right? Because that's the only way. If we don't have any productivity, if we don't have any GDP, right? How are the retirees going to get the returns that they need to live on, right? And at this stage, they need to be earning at least, as you say, 7%, right? Because 4% is just keeping pace with inflation, right? And 3% is what they have to basically live on.
Yeah, which means those super funds got to go heavily leveraged to probably get that 7-8% return.
Maybe not an area or.
So we've got the first point on, we need leadership that has a clear strategy that's not overly accommodated. It's more balanced then to giving business performance.
Yep.
Building a workforce and maybe getting back to a culture that is much more on performance based and treating individuals on their metrics and their true ability.
Yeah, a meritocracy.
Meritocracy, and not dividing and understanding in the workplace that you can't just label people as something. You know, I think the politics across all countries is getting very divisive. They really do enjoy people not aligning with each other, and whether it be gender, race, whatever, section, you know, whatever it wants to go down, they do like to push a few buttons. And that must then translate into the workforce culture, and then we've got productivity, which I know everyone is on the AI bandwagon, and I've done a few podcasts myself on AI, and I run an AI company now. You know, my technology is very much using artificial intelligence. But you know, to get productivity gains to increase, it's not just going to be using technology. It's going to be bringing back a proper culture in the workforce, I'm guessing, as well. Hiring differently, going into much more defined accountability and responsibility on roles, and having more simplified org charts with much more simplified position descriptions that sort of cut away the noise and get to what is actually mattering at the operational level, as well as, you know, it seems to me, I did get that vibe from the book as well, that they did touch on a lot of the jargon that goes on in these corporate org charts, and some of the roles that, you know, you read the title and you think, well, what does that person actually do with that title? I don't understand that role. That's me personally. Do you think that the culture can still be as good as it was? And I'm not saying as like everything was perfect in the 90s or early 2000s, so I'm not using that as a baseline, but do you think culture can be as good with people working from home in hybrid working environments as it can when everyone is in the office together? Do you think we can still achieve that sort of good culture, business alignment, everyone singing to the same hymn sheet, everyone understanding what the goal of the business is so that they can put their part in helping it achieve it? Or do you think working from home, you know, you always got to give and take, and it certainly is really beneficial for many, but can a business really drive a good culture with that model?
Yeah, I think if you interviewed 10 people, you get 10 different answers on this one, Richard.
I know. I'm not for one or the other either. I'm just not for one or the other.
Nor am I, but I do think people are people, right? And social interaction, like I know certainly in the consulting business, when the team is working in the same room, right, the associate can see that the analyst is struggling, can lean in, teach the analyst, right, how they can think about or the problem differently, or indeed, you know, the method, the approach that they should be adopting. When the partner's in the room, he can hear the conversation, he can hear the issues, right? He can or she can internalize, like, and indeed develop a deeper understanding of the client's problem, right? And bring their experience to bear in the room, right? So that dynamic is very difficult from a consulting perspective to replace online. That said, you know, I think when we work with our clients, it used to be that we always had to be on site, right?
Yeah.
And there are certain projects, if we are working on like systemic change, if we are working on the culture of the business, then you do need to be with your client, right? But if I'm doing supply chain modeling, right, and the first phase is grabbing the data and analyzing that data, I could do that just about anywhere, right? So what's the problem you're solving for? and what's the right tool, right? So that's from a consulting perspective. I do, like any leadership team, right? Like the efficacy of the leadership team is built on the level of trust around that table, right? And the quality and the leadership of the CEO, right? And the dynamic that individual fosters amongst their leadership team, right? And the peers. And culture definitively starts at the top. There is no question about that, right? And so how does a fragmented leadership team, right? And I think, this is the challenge for leadership teams. If they believe that it's fundamentally important for them and their business to set the culture, right, which I think is a key role, and they believe that the best way to do that is to be in the office together, right, then I think the organisation should follow, right? If they believe that they can do that through other mechanisms, because maybe they've already got established relationships, then I think, they might consider that as the right model for the business. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to any of this, right?
Yeah.
But I do think, though, that there is generally a view, and there's some good data on this, that says, like, people who are in the office tend to be more productive, right? And then you ask the question, why is that? And I come back to my first point, which is I'm working with my peers. I'm learning from my peers. Information's more readily available within the context. So I think there is a role for creating a workplace culture. And I think many of us believe that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if you believe that, as I do, then you need to do the things that create a very strong culture.
Yeah.
And if one of those things is having people work in the office, have them in the office.
Do you feel that some businesses approach a transformation with good intent? So they do want to improve customer experience. They do, they're focusing on the customer value proposition, but then they want to do something, but they're not ready for it. And how do you manage that? Like, if a corporation wants to do something, but they're so far back on the investment ladder, they've not really taken the time to even put in an ERP system or a CRM system, or, they're really way back in terms of sophistication. How do they best approach that? I mean, and what do you typically advise them on? Because it must elongate that journey of or do they rush it and go, no, we can still do it, and they try and do everything all at once and the wheels fall off?
Yeah. I don't think, any ERP system or any tool, it's the difference between transformations that starts with adjectives versus verbs, right? Like improving customer performance or delivering standout customer performance is the verb, right? Like that's something that I can hold on to, right? A digital customer transformation is an adjective, right? That's an important, and we draw that out in the book.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
And that's an important distinction, right? So, start with the verbs, right? What is it that we need to do, right? And then actually, what's the suite of things that need to change, right? The point that you're touching on, though, and this is where I think certainly the experience of the partner you choose, right? Whether it's Kearney or others, there's two things. I mean, one of the things that people say about my firm is that you work with us, right? You help us drive the change. You don't work on us, right? So they find that change is more sustainable, right? And one of the things about working with the client is really understanding where they're at on their journey, right? And you come back to the old adage of give me a B-class strategy executed well over an A-class strategy executed poorly any day, right? If you can do both, fantastic. You rarely see it, right?
So a lot of businesses see the tool as the strategy.
Yeah.
They're seeing the actual tool itself as the big, the thing that's going to...
As the transformation.
As the transformation itself.
Rather than the enabler.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that brings me then on to your agile waterfall differentiator. Can we go into that a bit? Because I found that really interesting chapter as well.
Yep. Super interesting chapter.
Yeah, very interesting. The
I think
holy
its
grail
subtitle is the emperor has no clothes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So it was really touching on the holy grail was agile at one point, like all trends, and it was a bunch of guys from Spotify. Was it Spotify? No.
Different clients.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the originators of this methodology. I thought they were coming.
Oh, yes, it was.
They were coming from
companies.
Spotify.
It may well have been.
I thought
it was long before Spotify.
Oh, it might have been. I can't remember the name of the business. And then all roads lead to that. But then it got broadened out into corporate-wide strategy, and everything then went agile. And then chaos ensues, is my gathering, a very high level.
Yeah.
But I'll let you go into more detail if you can. I don't want it to be a memory test.
Like Adam and I have had this discussion many times.
Yeah.
And he's been a great provocateur of like the right method for the right problem. And yeah, look, where you try and holistically apply a method to all problems or all transformations, then invariably things are going to come undone. And, I forget the exact expression, but it's like when the end becomes agile, right? When that is the end game, you've lost the essence of what you're trying to do, right? It's like it's a tool, right? And it's a good tool to use in certain so for example, where you are writing code, right? Where you are sort of trying to problem solve in a very rapid environment, right? But when you're running large programs, sort of a more structured, a more critical path driven approach is equally important to understand, right? And that's really
because it touches on businesses years ago would be central demand and control.
Yep.
And that's now gone to empowering cost centers or departments to basically have a little bit of entrepreneurial freedom and go for broke.
Yep.
And then,
which, like, I don't think you need to call it agile, but you can, not necessarily in defense of, but you could actually appreciate in today's environment, right, why certain CEOs, why certain organizations might want to adopt that thinking more broadly, right?
Yeah.
Like I like to talk to my clients about the basis of competition has changed, right? So if you look at, early industrialization, right? Like what mattered was that you had the asset, right? And if you had the scale, you had the lower cost, right? You won, right? Then really the next phase was, could I outpace my competitor, right? So could I go faster? Could I innovate my processes faster? Could I innovate my product faster, right? And so if I could do that faster than my competitor, I should win, right? And I think in today's environment, complexity aside, which we've spoken about, right? It's really, it's an acceleration game, right? It's not about just the size of the asset or how fast we're going, but how much quicker, right, can I actually churn and turn, right, and out compete, accelerate to the next stage than my nearest competitor, right? And in order to do that, when you've got large organizations, you come back to, and you have to think that the organizations need to solve problems more quickly, right? They need to be more agile, right? The challenge is how you
But they do become more fragile the bigger they
get. They
do.
And there's a trade-off, right?
Yes.
There is an absolute trade-off. But, large organizations can be very bureaucratic, right? And that bureaucracy is both a strength and an Achilles, right? And so where is it an Achilles, and how do you address that?
Yeah,
right.
Which comes back down to productivity as well, because that is a drag on it.
Completely, yeah, completely. So yeah. Look, I think the main point to take away from that chapter is, really think about the transformation you want to run. Think about like where you want to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and think about the pathways to get there, and what your organization can physically absorb, right? In one of my earlier roles, I'd come in, we were running this organization breakthrough teams, right? And we'd been going for about 18 months, and the ELT said, the organization is exhausted, right? So we just need to cruise for a little bit, right? And that's a decision too, right? But that was 20 years ago. And I do wonder if the expectations of business today, and you look at AI, and it is an accelerator for all of us, right?
Yeah.
And as an accelerator, like, what do I therefore need in my business? And one of the points I wanted to leave you with, Richard, is that, like, I do wonder if, like, transformation used to be thought of as point-in-time exercises, right? I have a business strategy, and this was very true of the 70s and the 80s. You had 5-year strategies, 10-year strategies, and you built out towards those, right? Strategies can change very quickly today, and that comes back to that word agility, which is often used poorly, right? or overrepresented. But you need that in today's environment, mind you. Like, again, what's fit for purpose? If you're in a mining industry, right, where you're going to be in that commodity for 30, 40 years, and you're going to spend, I don't know, $5-10 billion opening up a mine, and you're going to have to lay those bets, right? Like, you probably want good process, right? Yeah. You want to have good diligence on those decisions. If you're in a tech industry where things can change on a dime, right? You're relevant today, not relevant tomorrow. You can see how I'm drawing that contrast. And I think, like, pick what's right for you. Pick an advisor that's going to give you that insight.
in terms of resilience, which is touched on, it seems that everyone's trying to shorten their supply chains and localize as much as possible. Is that a fair,
Well, in a geopolitically stable world,
yeah,
it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
In one that's not so stable, then you've got to rethink it.
Because the book brings up lots of topics of ever increasing ESG regulation, China falling off the growth curve, maybe not giving us such, iron ore hitting $60 per ton from where it was at 130. Lots of different scenarios bringing in, and then we can add in war and the close of various Red Sea, Strait of Hormuz, whatever. So transformations are probably going to be, I'm assuming, increasing, because a lot of businesses are set for what was and not probably framed for the new normal, both in ability to generate revenue, profit, having a global supply chain, having a cost-driven, just-in-time supply chain over something with more resilience. And I was speaking to Kieran Hines a lot about resilience, and it goes into quite a fair bit of detail in your book as well.
Yeah.
What's your view on supply chain resilience, and what do you think, have you got any major opinions on what, and again, it varies in different industries, it always will, but what would businesses be looking to do that do have, of course, a lot of dependency on US, China with trade, Japan? I think Japan is our biggest import. We import the most from Japan. I think it's 5% of our import value.
From China?
Japan.
Yep.
China's 4. US,
Yep.
I think, is 2.
Yeah.
But increasing. And then we got tensions with the US and China as well, which puts Australia a little bit in the middle of, it's very dependent on China, but obviously you've got the US as well. But what should businesses be thinking about? Should they be thinking of maybe increasing their balance sheet, relying more on, bringing assets in, being less reliant on third parties, maybe leveraging those assets for increased revenue diversification? Have you got a view on?
Well, I think that there's, the CPG chapter, which Kate Hart co-authored in the book, talks to supply chain resiliency. And, I think one of Kate's key bits of advice to the industry is, indeed, like, we've got the tools now to make our supply chains more transparent and more visible, right? So investing in that, right, to give you the information is a more efficient way. And I use the word efficient there from a productivity angle. Sure, you can keep more inventory, but now you're tying up capital.
That's right. Right?
And if I'm tying up capital, I'm not investing in making my business more productive. So there's a real trade-off, right?
Yeah.
And of course, I'm reducing the ROIC, right, which really goes to what my shareholders expect.
Yeah.
So clearly, it's a balancing act, right? But it's surprising to us as a firm as to when you go into businesses, right? Either they have the data and they're not using it as they should, or even worse, they don't have the data, right? And it's relatively easy to get, right, with some investment, right, which then gives them, the ability to plan better, the ability to make decisions better, right, which ultimately augur towards better supply chain resiliency, right?
Yeah.
Rather than the tendency to go down the physical path, which is, I'll just hold more of that, right?
Yeah, which is actually very poor.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? The amount of businesses I speak to lots of people, and obviously procurement, supply chain, and, they'll go into a new business and the very first thing they'll say is, we haven't got data. Some of these businesses might have 10-year mature procurement framework, but they'll still go in, we haven't got a spend queue. We don't know what we buy.
Today.
Yeah.
I know.
And then, they can't really do much from that.
I know.
It's And then they're probably getting a spend cube drawn up that's, it'll do, but it's not perfect. So.
How can you not have a real-time view of what you're spending?
But they've invested in a SAP system or an Ariba or an Oracle, but they're dragging the Ferrari down the road with a bit of rope, as I like to say. They're not actually, they've put the money into it, but they're not.
I think systems, the other point there is systems aren't always the answer, right?
No.
Because you would have seen in the various sort of clients you've worked with, Richard, that like they have systems where the level of functionality being used is low.
Low,
right?
yeah.
Very low, right? So the system has the capability, right? But the client hasn't activated that and or isn't fostering like the capability and or the culture to use that functionality.
Well, the vibe I get, and in fairness, this book does touch on it, again, why I did enjoy reading it. The operations part of business seems to be quite neglected. It seems to be the poor stepchild of the business. They focus on the sales, the marketing, the brand, and, but the things that really matter, the actual cogs that make the business run, the operations seem to be a second fiddle.
I think as productivity comes much more into focus, right, which I think we agree is happening, we talk about the book in the book that the role of the chief supply chain officer, the CPO, is auguring a seat at the table, right? And the importance that they bring to the sustainability, right, and the execution of a business strategy is increasing, right? So,
what limits, Enrico, in your view, if you're comfortable, and if you're not, don't worry, what limits typical heads of procurement? I mean, everyone's a CPO now. I mean, I've never seen such an overused title either as well. Everyone's a chief procurement officer, and I would say Australia's got very few. If I'm being honest, there's very few procurement people I know that sit at the board. They report into a CFO, maybe a COO, but they're not a chief procurement officer.
Yep.
But everyone's throwing the title around. But let's just say a procurement director then, for argument's sake, or GM. What is there a trend of what limits, not to point fault at the GM of procurement or the director of procurement, but is there a trend that limits where procurement is actually getting elevated to? Is there a lack of technical capability or cultural nuance with a typical head of procurement that's limiting them getting to the top? Is it a view from the board down that it's just not seen, it's just seen as a person that's going to get a better unit price across transactions without, to move all the jar? I mean, I've got clients now that I know for a fact they've got long-term contract agreements, they're meant to be doing SRM and supply development, yet as inflation storm comes in, they're trying to renegotiate across the vendor pipeline, damaging relationships, damaging the entire supply chain, but they're going to do it. Not because they even probably want to. And that's a lot of clients I talk to. So that whole SRM and partnering model and seems to just very quickly pivot when pressure is applied to the business. So I'm going on to 2 points here. I often do that. Is there a point where is there something that CPOs can do where they can get a seat at the table? Is there something that's obvious in your circles? And how should procurement be applied? That's the second one, which I went rolling, as I often do. How should procurement be applied when a business is under such amount of stress? How do you stop the wheels falling off the supply chain and it being cannibalized through panic?
Yeah, there's a lot of points there. I think procurement's like many functions today, as organizations have delayered, right, skinnied down, gone through a de-skilling, right? Training budgets have been cut, right? So the investment in functions, certainly when I joined ICI, it was a very paternalistic organisation. The level of training that we did, the level of mentoring that we had, but there was also a structure, and I'm not saying we should go back to the future. There was also a structure that allowed me to sort of grow as a manager, as a leader, right?
Was that matrixed? Did you have proper depth in the org chart?
There was depth in the org chart, right? And so, you know, when I started, I joined the process engineering function, and I had a mentor in Melbourne, ICI Australia Engineering. I had a mentor at the site, and then I had my boss, and then I had my peers, right? So I don't know that, like, given the need for organisations to be more productive, right, that system exists. It still exists in some organisations, but not in many.
I've seen org charts getting flatter and flatter and flatter, which then increases the velocity of movement of the juniors. So they are actually getting a higher acceleration in their salaries, but they're not learning.
Right. And
because they're moving every 2 years. If
you've got 10 or 15 direct reports, you're not investing in it, or you're incapable of investing across that many people. So I think there's a systemic issue, right?
Do you know why they went flat, by the way? Do you know why there's this ever flattening of the org chart? Is there?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think that is the pursuit of productivity, right? And so you do reach a point at which, like, you don't have that capacity to drive capability, right?
Yeah.
And so you need to think about different models to build that capability, right? And so industry bodies, right, more formal education outside of the day-to-day need to be fostered, right? And when I first moved into the consulting game, and I was at a SIPS breakfast, Sam Walsh, who was then the CEO of Rio Tinto, was the guest or the keynote, and I ended up interviewing Sam, and he came from procurement. He
did.
Right? He came from from General Motors, which had a very big sort of focus on procurement and all the levers, very sophisticated, to Rio to build their procurement capability. And I think there's a model that I think a lot of businesses can adopt today, which was, you know, if you were a young finance grad, or you're an engineering manager, or you were in sales, you were required, or there was a need to push some of those people through procurement, right? And that did two things, right? It actually inculcated in those people good commercial and negotiation skills, right? But equally, as they then went back out into the business, they had a fundamental understanding of the value that procurement could deliver.
Yeah.
Right? And so it created a much broader community and a much broader understanding.
Easier engagement, better traction.
And so the engineer who spent 3 years in procurement was now maybe the operations manager at the mine, would call procurement in naturally, right? But would also know how to brief procurement as to what they wanted, right? And I do think procurement's role given, you look at, to use a phrase, so many of our organizations today are Nike-like, right? It's sort of like they do a very thin level of core activities, and
it's a brand ultimately
and they outsource a lot
everything.
right, of other things. So procurement plays, in my mind, the future of procurement is being that business improvement, that internal consultant to your business.
To empower capability sourcing more than just material sourcing.
Completely.
Which
right?
is why I think a lot of outsourced people are very smart and very commercial, because they're literally taking something off the balance sheet to manage on the P&L, which has way more, well, it's all risky, but I mean, it seems to be way more complex. They're very good deal doers. I find people that do BPO or big BPO deals, they're very smart. They're very commercial.
Of course they are.
Understand tail risk really, really well.
Yep.
And that leads me to the second point, sorry, which is, what would your advice be to procurement or to businesses? It's not really procurement. Sometimes they're sort of told what hurdles they got to jump and that stuff, but they got to do. But when a business is feeling pressure, they're getting inflation coming through the back end, from the suppliers, they're all feeling inflation through the value chain. How is there any words of wisdom to stop them cannibalizing their own strategic value proposition and, unraveling what they...
I think if you're a procurement professional that only focuses on price, you may get a sugar hit, but ultimately, it's unsustainable, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, being able to understand how your business is adding cost to your supply market by poor behaviors, poor information, poor planning, right? Poorly defined expectations, right? Those value levers, right? It's the classic on, you look at maintenance services, right? And the procurement guy is looking at dollars per hour, right? But
I'll just make it break down more.
Does it break down more? How long does it take that vendor to fix it versus the other vendor?
Why not just pay to keep it going?
Right. Pay to keep it going.
Don't worry about the breaking.
If that's not your thing, then give it to someone who's incented and has the capability to do that for you, right? And so, as I said, good procurement has always looked at that breadth, right? That's always been true.
Resilience could be a good thing.
Pardon?
Supply chain resilience could be a good thing for procurement under a different umbrella of cost saving, maybe, because resilience must have more cost associated with it, and probably a little bit more foresight and scenario planning.
Maybe a bit more cost, but I think that's.
But cost is the bad bit, isn't it? A lot of the time, cost is when you didn't do it and then you suffer the consequences a lot of the time. I mean,
the opportunity. Well, yes and no, and I do. Planning can't solve for everything.
No,
right? But it can solve for a lot.
Yeah.
A lot, right?
It's,
if my operations aren't telling procurement and supply chain that, my plan is going to go up from a production perspective by 30%, right? Don't come and blame the vendor when they're running short of product for you, right? And that ability to sort of see through the supply chains, that exists today, right? There's no excuse for organizations to say I don't have the data, or it's bad planning, right? We were asked to come in and remediate a program on a mine where the organization had really hit tough times. Commodity prices had fallen, and they took the planners out, right? What was the result of that? Well, the young guys that were in the business didn't understand that it took a day to move a drag line, right?
Right.
Well, that was a day of production, right? So how you sequence those moves is really important, right? They didn't understand that they should like be working with their vendor and reasonably pay them more to drill a deeper explosives hole, right? Their intransigence to doing that meant more fines because higher energy explosives, more cost of explosives, right? Less productivity, right?
Yeah.
And indeed the drag lines would break because you didn't have good fragmentation, right? So it's just like when you get down to it, it's like procurement's got a really important role to play in the productivity equation. And in fact, Rob Harris, who wrote the second chapter, leads our operations practice. And like this is what Rob does every day.
Yeah, I like Rob. Nice guy.
Yeah.
I was just looking in the book to see if there's anything else that because obviously my memory's shocking. It's pretty bad. So I just wanted to reference it. Is there anything you would like to, Rico, honestly, I know we've gone over what you probably wanted.
It's been a good conversation.
And I hope you're not absolutely
No, it always
knackered.
No, it just gives me, it's always good to have these conversations. It helps crystallize your own thoughts and the conversations you want to have with your clients.
Well, I would just pass them over to you, I'm sure. I don't know if you'll say it better than me. Is there anything you'd like to cover off before we wrap up? And, where can people, of course, get a lighthouse in the global storm? It's the only thing I'll be plugging because
they can write to me.
Yeah.
And we'll have, someone send out a book to them.
Okay.
We'd be very happy to do that.
All right.
And it is a good read.
It is a good read. Like I said, I wouldn't just.
I think it's a good reflection.
I wouldn't plug something I didn't genuinely enjoy reading.
It really does make us stop and just reflect on how we think about sort of the importance of productivity, the importance of the techniques that we use, right?
Yeah.
The fact that, AI is a tool.
It's a tool,
right?
Yeah.
But like how it's used, right? How it's inculcated is really even more important. And that's what the book talks about. So I really appreciate
and
the
it goes into
opportunity.
the geopolitics as well, which I love. And it doesn't miss areas. It's quite complete, and I like that. It looks at all views,
and it covers all sectors.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So Richard, I really appreciate the opportunity. Good to catch up.
Yeah, good to catch up, mate. Good
Likewise.
chat.